The restaurant had a soft glow that evening, the kind that made people speak a little quieter and sit a little straighter. Warm lights hung low above each table, reflecting off polished wood and glass. A gentle piano melody floated through the room, played by the hired musician near the window. It was meant to be background music, nothing too bold, just enough to make guests feel important. Most people came here to celebrate something: anniversaries, business deals, birthdays, quiet victories no one else knew about. The staff moved smoothly between tables, trained to notice everything without being noticed themselves. Among them was a young waitress who blended into the rhythm of the place. She carried plates with steady hands, remembered orders without writing them down, and spoke politely without forcing a smile. She had worked there long enough to know the regulars. She could tell who would leave a generous tip, and who would complain no matter how perfect the service was. Tonight, one particular guest stood out the moment he walked in. His posture was stiff, his expression sharp, and his eyes scanned the room as if he were judging it before even sitting down. He was known in certain circles as a harsh critic, not just of food, but of music, art, and people. His opinions carried weight, and he knew it. Some restaurant managers feared him, others tried too hard to impress him. He took pride in his reputation, and rarely missed a chance to remind others of his refined taste. When he was seated near the center of the room, the energy around his table changed. The waitress noticed it right away. She approached calmly, greeted him, and offered the menu. He barely looked at her. Instead, his eyes moved toward the piano player, who had just started a slow, gentle piece. He sighed loudly, just enough for nearby tables to hear. "Is this really the best you have?" he said, shaking his head. The waitress paused, unsure if he was speaking to her. "I'm sorry, sir," she asked softly. "The music," he replied. "It's dull, no soul, no risk." He waved his hand toward the piano without even looking at it again. Restaurants like this always pretend to care about quality, but they never do. She nodded politely, the way she had been trained. "I'll pass your feedback to the manager," she said. He gave a short laugh. "Feedback, please. I doubt anyone here would understand it." She did not respond. She simply took his order and moved on, though his words stayed with her longer than she wanted them to. She had heard criticism before. People complained about food being too cold, too slow, too salty. But this felt different. It felt personal, even though it wasn't meant to be. As the night went on, the restaurant filled up. Laughter mixed with the clinking of glasses. The piano music continued, steady and calm. The critic, however, seemed more irritated with every passing minute. He sent his soup back because it wasn't hot enough. He corrected the pronunciation of the wine out loud, even though the waitress had said it correctly. Each comment was sharp, unnecessary, and clearly meant to be heard. The waitress handled it the way she always did. Calm voice, careful steps, no reaction on her face. But inside, something stirred. Every time the piano played a familiar phrase, her attention shifted, just for a moment. Her ears caught details others might miss. A missed note here, a rushed tempo there. She didn't mean to notice. It just happened, between tables. She found herself standing a little closer to the piano than required. Not too close to seem rude, but close enough to listen. The piano had always been there, part of the room, part of the job. But for her, it meant more than background sound. It was a reminder of something she had once been, and something she had quietly buried. The critic noticed her lingering glance. He leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Do you enjoy the music?" he asked, raising his voice slightly. She looked over, surprised. "Yes, sir. It's nice," she said carefully. "Nice," he repeated, amused. "That's all you hear? Nice." She hesitated. Words formed in her mind, honest words, but she swallowed them. "It fits the mood," she replied instead. He laughed again, louder this time. "Of course you'd say that." Nearby guests shifted in their seats. Some looked uncomfortable. Others pretended not to hear. The pianist kept playing, unaware or choosing to ignore the tension. The critic leaned forward. "You work here, right?" "Yes," she said. "And you think you understand music?" he asked. She felt her chest tighten. "I didn't say that, but you're listening so closely," he replied, watching the hands, watching the keys. "You must have opinions." She opened her mouth, then closed it. The truth pressed against her lips. She wanted to explain. She wanted to say that music was not something she judged lightly, that it was not just sound to her. But she knew her place. She knew how quickly things could turn. "I'm just doing my job," she said. He studied her for a moment, eyes sharp. "That's what I thought." She walked away. but his gaze followed her. He had noticed something, though he wasn't sure what. Confidence, maybe, or restraint. Either way, it irritated him later. During a brief lull, the manager whispered to the waitress to take a short break. She nodded and stepped aside near the piano area, where staff usually waited when there was nothing urgent to do. She stood quietly, hands folded, listening. The pianist began a new piece, slightly more complex. The melody twisted, rose, then fell. It was almost right, almost. Her fingers twitched without her realizing it. She imagined the corrections, the smoother transitions, the fuller sound. She caught herself and quickly lowered her hands. Across the room, the critic watched. He leaned toward a couple at the next table and said something under his breath. They laughed politely, though their smiles seemed forced. He straightened in his seat, clearly enjoying the attention. Then, louder than before, he spoke again. "It's always interesting," he said, "how people with no training think they understand art just because they hear it." The room grew quieter. The pianist faltered for half a second but continued. The waitress felt heat rise to her face. She stayed still, eyes down. She had learned long ago that responding rarely helped, but something had shifted. The mood was no longer just uncomfortable. It was tense, like a wire pulled too tight. The critic glanced at her again, this time with a small smile, not a friendly one, a challenging one. She met his eyes for just a second, then looked away. In that brief moment, he made a decision, one driven by pride more than curiosity. He was used to control, used to being the smartest person in the room, and the idea that a waitress might quietly disagree with him, even without words, bothered him more than he cared to admit. He cleared his throat. "Tell me," he said, voice calm but firm, "have you ever played an instrument?" The question hung in the air. The waitress froze. Her heart began to beat faster. Memories rushed forward without warning. Long afternoons, cold practice rooms, calloused fingers, applause she once believed would last forever. She swallowed. "I need to get back to work," she said softly. He smiled wider. That wasn't an answer. Round them, guests sensed something unfolding. Forks paused midair. Conversations faded. Even the piano seemed quieter, as if waiting. The waitress took a slow breath. She did not answer, not yet. And in that silence, the challenge began to form, though no one fully realized it yet. The room did not return to normal after the question was asked. The sound of plates and soft talk faded, as if someone had slowly turned the dial down. The waitress stood near the table, her body still, her face calm, but her thoughts moving fast. She felt the eyes of strangers settle on her, some curious, some uneasy. The critic leaned back in his chair, waiting. He enjoyed moments like this, moments where people felt unsure and he felt in control. "I asked if you've ever played an instrument," he said again, slower this time. She swallowed. Her voice came out quiet but steady. "Yes." A few people nearby exchanged glances. One person raised an eyebrow. The critic smiled, like someone who had just been proven right. "Yes," he repeated. "That's a big word. What did you play?" She hesitated, then answered, "The piano." He let out a short laugh. "Of course. Everyone plays the piano, don't they?" She felt heat rise in her face but kept her posture straight. "I should get back to work," she said. "But now you've started something," he replied. "You've been standing near the piano all evening, listening closely, watching. You clearly have opinions." "I didn't mean any disrespect," she said. He waved a hand. "I'm not offended. I'm curious." The manager noticed the tension and walked over. "Is there a problem here?" "No problem at all," the critic said quickly. "Just a conversation." The manager looked at the waitress. She gave a small shake of her head, signaling she was fine. "Well," the critic continued, "if she understands music so well, maybe she'd like to share that understanding." The words landed harder than he intended. Or maybe exactly as he intended. "I don't perform here," the waitress said. Neither did the piano player until he sat down. The critic replied, "Talent doesn't need permission, does it?" The pianist stopped playing. His hands hovered over the keys, unsure whether to continue. The room grew even quieter. The manager frowned. "This is not appropriate." "Why not?" the critic asked. If she truly played before, this should be easy. The waitress felt a tight knot form in her chest. She looked at the piano. The distance between her and the bench felt much longer than it really was. "I haven't played in years," she said. "That's an excuse," the critic replied calmly. "Music doesn't leave you." She did not answer. Guests were now openly watching. Some looked uncomfortable. Others were curious. A few leaned forward, Sensing drama. The manager lowered his voice. You don't have to do this, she nodded, grateful. But the words spoken earlier echoed in her mind. Music doesn't leave you. She surprised herself by speaking again. If I play, she said, it won't be for judgment. The critic smiled. All art is judged. Then I won't play, she replied. The room reacted softly. A few sighs. A few nods. The critic tilted his head. Afraid. The word stung. She took a slow breath. No, she said. Careful. That answer seemed to interest him even more. Fine, he said. Play one piece, just one. If it's good, I'll admit I was wrong. The manager stepped in. That's enough. But the waitress lifted a hand slightly. It's okay, she said. The manager hesitated. Are you sure? She nodded. I am. The pianist stood and moved aside without a word. He looked at her with quiet respect. She walked toward the piano. Each step brought back memories she had tried to forget. The smell of polished wood. The familiar shape of the instrument. The weight of history pressing gently on her shoulders. She sat down. Her hands rested on her lap. The keys waited. She closed her eyes for a moment. The noise of the restaurant faded. In its place came other sounds. Old rooms. Soft voices. Metronomes ticking. Applause far away. She opened her eyes. The critic watched closely, arms crossed. Confident, she placed her fingers on the keys. They trembled. She pulled her hands back. I'm sorry, she said quietly, standing up. I can't do this like this. A ripple of sound moved through the room. The critic chuckled. I thought so. But she did not leave. She turned back to the piano. I didn't say I couldn't play, she said. I said I couldn't play for this. For what? He asked. For being proven wrong, she replied. Music isn't a test. The room went still again. The manager watched her closely. If you play, he said gently. Play because you want to. She nodded. She sat down again. This time, her hand stayed on the keys. She did not look at the critic. She did not look at the room. She looked only at the piano. She played the first note. It was soft, almost shy. Then another. The melody grew slowly, like a thought forming carefully. The sound was warm, controlled, and full of feeling. Conversation stopped. The critic's smile faded. Just a little. The waitress played on, not fast, not loud, but certain. And as the music filled the room, the challenge began to change into something else entirely. The music continued, steady and calm, like a quiet river finding its path. The waitress kept her eyes on the keys. Her shoulders relaxed now, her breathing even. The room seemed to lean toward the piano, without anyone meaning to. Chairs creaked as people shifted closer. Even the air felt different. Softer somehow. She played a simple opening, nothing fast or loud. The notes rose gently, then settled, as if telling a story that did not need words. The melody carried a feeling of waiting, of patience learned over time. Some guests felt it before they understood it. A woman near the window wiped her eyes without knowing why. The critic watched closely. At first, he searched for mistakes, for missed notes or weak timing. He expected them. He wanted them. But they did not come. Her hands moved with quiet confidence, not rushed, not stiff. There was no show, no effort to impress. The pianist who had been playing earlier stood near the wall, arms crossed, listening. His expression changed slowly from concern to surprise, then to respect. He recognized the control in her fingers, the way she shaped the sound instead of chasing it. The melody grew stronger. She shifted into a deeper section, adding layers, letting the left hand speak more clearly. The sound filled the room without becoming heavy. It wrapped around conversations and gently asked them to stop. One by one, voices faded until only the piano remained. The waitress felt the piano respond to her touch. Old habits returned. The slight lift of the wrist. The way she leaned into certain notes and held back on others. She remembered being told that music was not about being perfect, but about being honest. She let herself be honest. The critic leaned back in his chair, no longer smiling. His arms unfolded. He listened now. Truly listened, whether he wanted to or not. Something in the music felt familiar, and that made him uncomfortable. The piece moved into a quiet passage. The sound dropped low, almost to a whisper. A glass clinked by accident at the far table, and the person quickly froze, embarrassed, as if they had broken something fragile. The waitress's fingers slowed, then paused for a brief moment. Not a mistake, a choice. The silence spoke just as loudly as the notes before it. Then she continued. This time, the music changed direction. It became fuller, warmer, carrying a sense of release. The sound lifted, spreading through the room like light through a window. A man near the bar smiled without realizing it. Another guest closed his eyes and leaned back, letting the sound wash over him. The critic's jaw tightened. He recognized the structure now. This was not casual playing. This was someone who understood form, who knew when to hold back and when to let go. Someone who had spent years listening, correcting, repeating. He glanced around and noticed the reaction of the room. Everyone was caught. No one looked bored. No one checked their phone. The waitress did not see any of this. She was somewhere else. She remembered the first time she had played in front of people. How her hands had shaken then, too. How fear had mixed with excitement. How applause had once felt like proof that her life had a clear direction. The memory passed through her without pain now. She reached a section that required speed and precision. Her fingers moved faster, but her face remained calm. The notes ran clean and bright, each one landing exactly where it should. The sound danced, light and sure. A soft gasp moved through the crowd. The critic leaned forward again, but this time not with challenge, with disbelief. The music slowed once more, returning to the theme from the beginning. It felt like coming home after a long journey. The melody carried weight now, shaped by everything that had come before. The waitress felt a tightness in her chest, but she did not fight it. She allowed it into the sound. The piano responded, rich and full. The manager stood near the back, hands clasped, completely still. He realized that the restaurant was no longer just a place to eat. It had become something else, something rare. The final section approached, and the room seemed to sense it. People leaned forward again. Someone held their breath. She slowed her hands, letting each note fade naturally. The last chord was not loud. It did not crash or demand attention. It simply settled, warm and complete. Her hands rested on the keys. Silence. For a moment. No one moved. No one spoke. It was the kind of silence that feels full, not empty. Then someone near the back began to clap. Another followed. Then another. The sound grew quickly, filling the room with applause that felt genuine and unforced. Chairs scraped softly as people stood. One by one, guests rose to their feet. The waitress looked up, startled. Her eyes widened as she saw the room standing, clapping, smiling. Some nodded at her. Others mouthed quiet words of thanks. She stood slowly, unsure what to do with her hands. She gave a small, awkward bow, then stepped away from the piano. The applause did not stop. The critic remained seated. He stared at the piano, then at her. His face showed conflict, pride wrestling with truth. The room waited, not because they needed his approval, but because they sensed something unfinished. Finally, he stood. The applause grew louder. He did not clap right away. He took a breath, then brought his hands together, slowly at first, then with more strength. His eyes never left her. The waitress felt her throat tighten. She nodded once in his direction, not in victory, but in acknowledgement. The pianist who had played earlier approached her quietly. "That was beautiful," he said. She smiled, overwhelmed. "Thank you." The manager stepped forward, raising his hand slightly. The applause faded. "We're honored to have witnessed that," he said to the room. "Thank you all for your patience." People slowly returned to their seats, still buzzing, still smiling. Conversations restarted, but the energy had changed. There was warmth now, connection. The waitress stepped away, her legs feeling light and heavy at the same time. She leaned against the wall near the kitchen entrance, breathing deeply. The critic approached. She tensed, then relaxed. Whatever he had to say would not take away what had just happened. He stopped a few feet away. "You didn't tell me you were trained," he said. "I didn't think it mattered," she replied. He nodded slowly. "It does." She waited. "I was wrong," he said, the words clearly difficult. "About the music. About you." She met his eyes. "Thank you." He hesitated, then added, "You shouldn't be hiding." She smiled softly. "Life isn't always that simple." He did not argue. As he returned to his table, the waitress looked back at the piano one last time. It no longer felt distant, not anymore. And though the night was far from over, something important had already changed. The restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but it was not the same as before. Voices were softer, laughter warmer. People spoke to each other like they had just shared something meaningful, even if they had arrived as strangers. The waitress stayed near the kitchen for a moment longer, letting the noise settle in her head. Her hands still felt warm, as if the piano keys were holding onto her. She flexed her fingers, grounding herself. Part of her wanted to disappear back into routine, to pick up a tray and pretend nothing had happened. Another part knew that pretending would no longer work. The manager approached quietly. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded. I think so. He smiled, not the polite smile he used with guests, but a real one. You did something brave tonight. She shook her head slightly. I just played. Sometimes that's the brave part, he replied. She let out a slow breath. I should get back to work. He paused. Take a few minutes. The room can wait. She thanked him and stayed where she was, watching the dining area from a distance. Guests kept glancing toward the piano, as if expecting it to speak again. Some whispered to each other. Others smiled when they noticed her. A couple near the window caught her eye and lifted their glasses in a quiet toast. She smiled back, surprised by how natural it felt. The pianist walked over, holding a glass of water. You might want this, he said. She accepted it gratefully. Thank you. I've been playing for years, he said. I could tell right away. You didn't lose it. She took a sip. Some things don't leave you, he nodded. If you ever want to play again, seriously, you should. She smiled, unsure how to answer. At the critic's table, the energy had shifted as well. He sat quietly now, his meal untouched for several minutes. He watched the room with a different expression, thoughtful rather than sharp. The confidence he carried earlier had softened, replaced by something closer to reflection. He finally picked up his fork, then set it down again. His mind replayed the performance, not searching for flaws anymore, but for understanding. He had spent years judging others from a distance, believing that talent followed a single path. Tonight had challenged that belief in a way he had not expected. He looked toward the waitress again, standing near the kitchen, and felt a strange mix of admiration and regret. When she returned to the floor, guests greeted her differently. Some thanked her quietly. Others complimented her music without making a scene. She responded politely, still finding her balance between pride and humility. One guest stopped her near the aisle. That was beautiful, the woman said. It reminded me why I fell in love with music. The waitress nodded. I'm glad it meant something to you. It did, the woman replied, eyes shining. As the night moved on, orders were taken, plates cleared, glasses refilled. But something invisible connected the room now. The waitress felt it each time she passed the piano. It no longer felt like a forgotten object. It felt like an open door. The critic asked for the check. When she brought it to the table, he looked up at her. May I ask you something? He said. She paused. Of course. Why did you stop? She knew what he meant. Life happened, she said simply. He nodded. It usually does. He hesitated, then added, you deserved better than how I spoke to you earlier. She met his eyes. Thank you for saying that. He placed his card on the tray, then looked at the piano again. Talent doesn't disappear, he said quietly. It just waits. She thought about that as she walked away. Later, when the restaurant began to empty, the manager gathered the staff briefly. I just want to say, he said, what happened tonight reminded me why this place matters. Thank you all. Several staff members glanced at her. She felt her cheeks warm. When her shift ended, she changed out of her uniform slowly, not wanting to rush back into the outside world. The night air greeted her as she stepped outside, cool and calm. The city hummed softly around her. She walked a few blocks before stopping. A small music shop sat on the corner, lights still on. She hadn't noticed it before, though it must have always been there. She stood outside the window, looking at the instruments inside. Pianos, keyboards, sheet music stacked neatly. Her reflection stared back at her, thoughtful. For years, she had told herself that chapter was closed, that it belonged to another version of her, one who had time, support, and certainty. But tonight had cracked that belief open. She turned away and continued walking. At home, she sat on her bed, shoes still on, replaying the night in her mind. The sound of applause echoed faintly, then faded. What stayed was not the praise, but the feeling of playing again. She realized she had missed it more than she had allowed herself to admit. The next morning came quickly. She woke with the same routine waiting for her, but something felt different. She moved through her day with a lightness she had not felt in years. Small sounds stood out more. The rhythm of footsteps, the hum of traffic. At work that evening, the piano waited quietly. She passed it without stopping, but she noticed it, truly noticed it. The critic did not return, but his absence did not matter anymore. What mattered was the question now growing inside her, one she could no longer ignore. What if she didn't have to choose between who she was and who she had become? The thought stayed with her as she worked, as she listened, as she moved through the room. The piano remained silent that night, but it no longer felt asleep. The days that followed passed quietly, but they did not feel empty. The waitress returned to her routine, tying her apron, greeting guests, carrying plates with the same steady hands. Yet something inside her had shifted. The world sounded different now. Every small noise carried rhythm. Every pause felt like space waiting to be filled. She noticed how people listened when she spoke, not because she was louder or different, but because she carried herself with calm confidence. The memory of the piano stayed with her, not as a spotlight moment, but as a reminder that a part of her had never truly gone away. One evening, the manager called her aside before the restaurant opened. "There's something I wanted to ask you," he said. She felt a familiar flutter of nerves. "Okay, we've been thinking," he continued, choosing his words carefully, "about adding short live performances on quieter nights. Nothing big, just something honest." She understood what he was asking. "I wouldn't expect you to say yes," he added quickly, "but I wanted you to know the door is open." She looked toward the piano. The lid was closed, resting quietly, as it always had. "I need time," she said. He smiled. "Take it." That night, the restaurant filled again. Different guests, different conversations. Some recognized her and smiled knowingly. Others had no idea what had happened days before. And that was okay. Near the end of her shift, she noticed a familiar figure walking. The critic. He looked different. Not in his clothes or posture, but in his expression. Softer, less guarded. He took a seat near the back, away from attention. She hesitated, then approached his table. "Good evening," she said. He looked up and nodded. "Good evening." There was a pause, not awkward, just honest. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" she asked. "For reminding me why I cared about music in the first place," he replied. She smiled gently. "I didn't plan to, I know," he said. "That's why it mattered." They shared a moment of understanding before she returned to her work. Later, as she wiped down tables, she noticed him watching the piano again. This time, there was no challenge in his eyes, only respect. When he left, he paused near the door. "If you ever choose to play again," he said, "people will listen." She nodded. Maybe someday. That someday arrived sooner than she expected. A week later, on a quiet evening, the manager approached her once more. "Only if you want to," he said. No pressure. She took a deep breath. "Okay." Word spread gently through the room. No announcement, no spotlight. Just a subtle shift as guests noticed her walk toward the piano. She sat down. This time, her hands did not shake. She played. Not to prove anything, not to answer doubt, but to share something real. The music flowed easily, shaped by all the moments she had lived since she last played. Joy, loss, patience, growth. Each note carried quiet truth. People listened. Some closed their eyes, some held hands, some simply breathed. When she finished, the applause came. But softer than before, deeper, like gratitude. She stood, smiling, heart full. From that night on, the piano was no longer silent. She did not quit her job. She did not chase fame. She simply allowed music back into her life, one evening at a time. The restaurant became known not just for its food, but for moments that stayed with people long after they left. As for the critic, he returned now and then, always quietly. He listened more than he spoke, and when he wrote again, his words carried something new, humility. The waitress never sought attention. She never needed to. She had found her voice again, and sometimes, that is the greatest standing ovation of all.